Finally, I discovered the hidden truth about my wife and my boss. What I saw through the telescope changed everything. My name is Jason, I'm 38 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant. It's a job that requires precision, a keen eye for detail, and an unyielding dedication to uncovering the truth. I live in a small but cozy apartment in downtown New York, and for the most part, my life has been stable, predictable even. I'm not exactly living the dream, but I'm content, or so I thought. My wife, Rachel, and I had been together for over a decade. Our relationship wasn't one of grand passion, but there was a quiet comfort to it. We had our ups and downs, but we always found our way back to each other. I didn't question it, until now. The first sign that things were starting to slip came slowly, like a creeping shadow in the corner of my vision. A subtle change in Rachel's demeanor, a shift in her tone when she spoke to me, a slight distance in her gaze. At first, I ignored it, chalking it up to stress at work or some fleeting phase. But over time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. For months, I'd been working on a case for a high-profile client, a massive company under investigation for financial fraud. My team and I had been entrenched in the details for weeks, sifting through mountains of data, uncovering discrepancies, and trying to make sense of the tangled web. It was a tough job, and the stress was starting to wear on me. But I wasn't expecting it to bleed into my personal life. One afternoon, as I sat in my office, staring at numbers that made my head ache, I glanced out the window, a habit I'd grown accustomed to during breaks. Across the street was the office building where Rachel worked. I couldn't see much through the tinted glass, but I knew her floor well. The 18th floor, her domain. I wasn't snooping, not really, but my gaze lingered longer than usual. That's when I noticed it, the subtle shift in her routine. A few weeks ago, Rachel had started staying late at the office, working long hours that I didn't quite understand. She used to tell me everything, but now, she seemed more distant. It was as if there was a wall between us, one that had slowly built itself up over time. That's when I saw him, Brad, a name I had heard mentioned casually at dinner parties and in passing conversations. He was a colleague of Rachel's, someone she spoke highly of, her mentor, she called him. He was a few years older than her, successful, confident. I never thought much of him, but now, seeing him walk into her office, I felt something stir in me, something primal and protective. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was happening between them. So I did what any man would do when his suspicions take root. I watched. I had access to a high-powered telescope from the audit office I was stationed at. It was an old tool, rarely used, but it was positioned perfectly to see across the street into Rachel's office. At first, I told myself it was just curiosity, nothing more. I focused on her movements, the way she typed on her computer, the occasional phone call. But then, something changed. I focused the lens carefully, trying to make out the details. And that's when I saw it. Rachel's feet, her black stilettos, propped up on Brad's lap as he massaged them. My heart skipped a beat. A wave of nausea hit me. It was a simple thing, a harmless thing, I told myself. But the intimacy of the gesture, the closeness, was undeniable. It wasn't the massage that rattled me. It was the way Rachel looked. She had her eyes closed, a smile playing on her lips as Brad's hands moved along her legs. It was the same smile I used to see on her face when we were alone, in the quiet of our home. The same smile I hadn't seen in months. My hands trembled as I lowered the telescope, my mind racing. I tried to make sense of what I had seen. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just a friendly gesture, something innocent. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew it wasn't. I picked up my phone, the weight of it feeling like 1,000 pounds in my hand. My thumb hovered over Rachel's name. Should I call her? Confront her? What was I hoping for? The words didn't come. I put the phone down, but I couldn't unsee the image. For the next few hours, I couldn't focus on anything. I watched Rachel from the telescope again and again, my heart sinking. Further each time I saw her with Brad. They weren't just talking anymore. She was laughing with him, touching his arm as they shared a joke. And when he left her office, she waved him off with a wink that made my blood boil. That night, when Rachel came home, I could barely look at her. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck in my throat. I acted normal, as if nothing had changed, but everything had. I could feel the walls between us growing higher, and I couldn't figure out how to tear them down. The next few days passed in a haze. I could barely focus on my work at the audit office. Every time I sat at my desk, I found myself staring out the window, unable to pull my mind away from what I'd seen. I tried to convince myself that it didn't mean anything, that Rachel was still the woman I loved. But the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. I tried to talk myself out of it. People have friendships, right? Maybe Brad was just helping her relax after a long day. But the way she smiled at him, the way he touched her feet, it didn't sit right. The longer I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Something was happening between them. But what? Had it been going on for months? Was she cheating on me? The possibility was too much to bear. I decided to confront Rachel. No more watching, no more passive observation. I needed answers. The night I decided to confront her, I came home early. Rachel was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. She didn't seem to notice the tension in the air, or maybe she did and chose to ignore it. I watched her, trying to gather the courage to speak. "Rachel," I said, my voice low, almost hesitant. She turned, her eyes warm. "Hey babe, how was your day?" "It was fine," I said, "but I need to talk to you." She paused, her smile fading. "What's wrong?" I could feel the lump in my throat growing. "It's about Brad." At the mention of his name, I saw her face freeze for a split second, before her expression softened into something almost defensive. "What about him?" she asked, setting down the knife she was holding, and turning to face me. "I've seen the way you've been acting around him lately. I've seen the way you're getting close to him." I paused, fighting back the anger that was rising within me. "I saw you, Rachel, through the telescope. You were with him. You let him touch you." I could see her face go pale. Her lips trembled, and for a moment, I thought she might deny it. But then, a look of guilt passed over her face, and she exhaled shakily. "I can explain," she said quietly. I was stunned. I thought she would deny it, lie to me, but her honesty hit me like a cold wave. "Explain what?" I asked, my voice cracking. Rachel took a deep breath, looking down at her hands. She was silent for a long moment before speaking again, her voice barely above a whisper. "It started a few months ago. Brad, he offered me a promotion. I was so close to getting it, Jason. I felt like I had to prove myself to him. I thought I could control it, that I could separate it. But I couldn't." Her voice faltered. I didn't want to hurt you, but I've been seeing him." I could barely breathe. The words she was saying didn't feel real. I had suspected it, but hearing her admit it was something else entirely. The betrayal hit me harder than I had imagined. She wasn't just flirting with him. She had crossed a line. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How long has this been going on?" Rachel's eyes filled with tears as she looked at me. "It's been a few months now. I didn't mean for it to happen, Jason. It just did." I wanted to yell at her, to make her feel the pain I was feeling. But something inside me stopped me. There was no need for that. The truth was clear. The truth was enough. I took a step back, my head spinning. How many times, Rachel? How many times have you been with him? She shook her head, her face crumpling as she began to sob. I don't know. I can't count anymore, but it's been more than I should have let happen. I never wanted to hurt you. I felt like I was suffocating. My mind was racing, but all I could focus on was the image of her with Brad, of them touching, of her smiling in a way she had never smiled at me in months. I wanted to understand, to know what had led her to this point. But all I could feel was a gnawing emptiness. You've been lying to me for months, I said, my voice tight. And now you want me to just accept it? How could you do this to me, Rachel? After everything we've been through. I don't expect you to forgive me, Jason, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't deserve it, but I'm so sorry. I don't even know how it happened, but it did. And now I've ruined everything. I couldn't respond. There were no words that could fix this. No words that could make it right. I need some space, I said, turning away from her. I need to think. I can't do this right now. Before she could say anything else, I grabbed my jacket and walked out of the apartment. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed to get away. I needed to clear my head to understand what I was going to do next. I spent the next few days in a haze of confusion and anger. Rachel's confession was still fresh in my mind, haunting me at every turn. I couldn't think straight, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with Brad. Their bodies too close, their intimacy far too real. Felt like my entire world had shattered in an instant. I went to work, pretending everything was fine. I buried myself in spreadsheets and financial reports, focusing on the numbers to keep my mind off the hell I was living in. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the images, the memories. That afternoon, my team and I were reviewing data for an investigation into a major financial fraud case. But all I could think about was Rachel and Brad. I was snapped out of my spiral when one of my colleagues, Mike, asked if I was okay. I didn't have the energy to lie, so I nodded, forcing a smile. You sure? Mike pressed, his eyes narrowing with concern. You look like you've seen a ghost. I shook my head. Just a rough night. Nothing I can't handle. But I wasn't handling it. Not at all. The next evening, after another tense dinner with Rachel, I could barely look her in the eye. She was apologizing again, begging for forgiveness, but her words felt hollow now. I didn't know if I could ever trust her again. I love you, Jason, she said, her voice breaking. Please, I need you to understand how sorry I am. I made a huge mistake. I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't respond right away. I wanted to believe her, I really did. But the image of her with Brad kept replaying in my mind. The way she had touched him, the way she had smiled at him. It felt like a betrayal I couldn't ignore. I don't know what to do with this anymore, Rachel, I said, my voice low. I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Her eyes welled up with tears, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I didn't know how. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'll do anything to fix this, Jason. Anything. Just tell me what you need from me. But the truth was, I didn't know what I needed. All I knew was that I was drowning in this mess of lies and betrayal. I needed answers. I needed closure. And I needed to feel like I could trust again. But that was impossible now. I excused myself and left the apartment. I couldn't stay in that house another minute. I drove aimlessly, trying to clear my head, but the more I thought, the more I realized. I couldn't just let this go. I couldn't pretend that nothing had happened. I needed to know the truth. As I drove, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mike. Hey, just checking in. How are you holding up? I didn't know why, but I decided to respond. Not great. Need some time to think. Mike replied almost instantly. Want to grab a drink? I know a place nearby. Might help clear your head. I didn't even think about it. I needed a distraction. I pulled into the parking lot of a small bar and met Mike inside. The dimly lit room, the hum of quiet conversation, and the clink of glasses made it feel like a world far removed from my. Mike slid into the booth across from me. All right, man. Talk to me. What's really going on? I exhaled slowly, my mind reeling. Rachel. She's been cheating on me. Mike's eyes widened in surprise, but he didn't interrupt. With who? I told him everything. About Brad. About the telescope. About the massage. I watched his face shift from disbelief to concern, but he didn't judge me. He just listened. When I finished, I felt like I had unloaded 1,000 pounds of guilt, confusion, and anger. I don't know what to do, Mike, I confessed. I don't know if I can ever get past this, if I can ever trust her again. Mike leaned back in his seat, taking a sip of his drink. Look, man, I know this feels like the end of the world right now, but you can't make decisions based on your anger. You need to think this through. If you love her, then maybe there's a way forward. If not, you need to make a clean break. I nodded slowly. It felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know what I needed. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living like this. The conversation shifted after that. We talked about work, about life, about anything but Rachel. And for the first time in days, I felt a tiny bit of relief. Maybe I needed to take a step back, to look at this situation from a different angle. But the next morning, everything changed. I woke up to a message from Rachel. She'd left me a note on the kitchen counter. Jason, I'm sorry for everything. I've made the biggest mistake of my life. I want to fix this, I swear. But I think we need to take a break. I need space. You need space. I'll be back later tonight. Please, let's talk. Something in my gut twisted. The words break and space echoed in my mind, and my heart sank. What was she asking for? Was this her way of ending things? Was she hoping for some kind of separation so she could continue seeing Brad without the pressure of our marriage? I grabbed my phone and scrolled through the messages. I had a missed call from a blocked number. My heart skipped a beat. I called it back, my hands trembling. This is Jason. Who's this? There was a long pause before a cold, unfamiliar voice responded. Jason, I have something you need to see. I froze, couldn't breathe. My mind was racing, heart pounding in my chest. I had no idea who was on the other end of the line, but there was something in their tone that sent a chill down my spine. What do you mean? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though it shook. Who is this? The voice on the other end didn't answer right away. For a moment, it was as if the world around me had gone completely silent. Finally, the voice spoke again, low and clipped. You don't know me, but I know everything about you. And I know about your wife. A shiver ran through me. Every nerve in my body was on edge, my mind desperately trying to piece together what was happening. What do you know? I asked, my voice trembling now. What do you want? Meet me at the diner on 5th, the voice said, before hanging up abruptly. I stood there for a few moments, my phone still in my hand. The world around me spinning. My mind went into overdrive. Was this some kind of sick joke? Or worse, was it someone trying to manipulate me or even threaten me? I didn't know, but I knew one thing. I couldn't ignore this. I had to know what they had. I had to know everything. The diner on 5th wasn't far. I drove there in a daze, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. My stomach twisted in knots. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. When I arrived, the diner was nearly empty, save for a couple of late-night patrons in the corner. A man sat at a booth near the back, his face partially obscured by a newspaper. I didn't recognize him, but there was something about him that set my nerves on edge. I approached cautiously, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The man didn't look up as I sat across from him. He continued reading his paper, as if this was just another ordinary meeting. "You're Jason," he said without looking up. "Good. I'm glad you decided to come." I didn't respond right away, studying his features. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a stern, emotionless expression. There was something about his calm demeanor that unnerved me. "What do you know about my wife?" I asked, my voice sharp. The man lowered his newspaper and looked at me. His eyes were cold, calculating, but there was something almost pitying in them. "I know more than you think," he said. "I've been watching Rachel for a while now, and I know exactly what she's been doing." I froze, my heart racing. My breath caught in my throat. "What are you talking about?" I whispered. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope, sliding it across the table to me. I stared at it, hesitant to touch it. The man's face softened slightly, almost sympathetically. "Take it," he said. "It's everything you need to know." I picked up the envelope with trembling hands. My fingers fumbled as I opened it, revealing a series of photographs. The first one was of Rachel, laughing, standing close to Brad in a way that made my stomach churn. It wasn't just a casual photo. It was intimate, personal. And in every photo, they were closer, hands on her waist, his lips dangerously close to her neck. The images weren't just evidence of an affair. They were evidence of betrayal, of something much deeper. But then I saw the last photo. My breath caught in my chest. Rachel wasn't just with Brad. She was with someone else too. The third man. And this man was someone I knew. Someone I never expected. My own boss, Victor. I felt the room spin around me. My world collapsed in an instant. Victor had always been kind to me. I had trusted him. But here he was, his hand on Rachel's waist, his lips pressed against hers in a moment that was so far beyond anything I could have imagined. "Why are you showing me this?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The man leaned back, folding his arms. "Because you deserve the truth. And Rachel isn't the only one hiding things. There's more." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart hammering in my chest. "You're not the only one being deceived," the man continued. "There are others in your wife's life who are just as involved as she is. And they're using you." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Who else?" asked, desperate to understand. The man's eyes narrowed. "I can't give you everything, Jason. But if you want to know more, you'll have to dig deeper. There's more to Rachel's story than you know. And it's time you started asking the right questions." I was shaking now, my mind racing as I tried to process the words. It wasn't just Brad. It wasn't just the affair. There were layers to this, layers I had never imagined. I stood up abruptly, feeling the weight of the world crushing down on me. "Where's Rachel?" I asked, my voice desperate. "Where is she right now?" The man gave me a look of pity. "I don't know, but I do know that you've been blind for far too long. It's time to face the truth. Whatever happens next, you need to be ready for it." I didn't say another word. I turned and left the diner, the photographs still clutched tightly in my hand. My head was spinning. I didn't know what to do with this information, but I knew one thing. I had to confront Rachel. I had to make her tell me everything. But as I stepped out into the cool night air, I realized I wasn't just confronting her about an affair anymore. I was confronting her about a lie that had been built on so many levels I wasn't sure it could ever be torn down. The drive back from the diner felt like an eternity. I was clutching the envelope in my hands, my knuckles white, my thoughts a swirling mess of confusion and anger. I couldn't make sense of any of it. Rachel's betrayal was bad enough, but now this Victor, my boss, a man I had trusted, was part of this web of lies, and I had been blind to it all. I needed answers. I needed to confront her. I knew I couldn't go back to that apartment, that house filled with memories of what I thought was a happy marriage. But I didn't know where else to go. I couldn't think straight, so I drove aimlessly, my mind caught in a storm of emotions. Eventually, I found myself in front of a small park. The lights were dim, and the benches were empty. It was quiet, peaceful in a way that felt surreal given everything that had happened. I parked the car and stepped out, trying to calm my racing thoughts. I needed to think. I needed to come to terms with the fact that everything I knew had been a lie. I sat on one of the benches, staring up at the stars, trying to put the pieces together. Then, as if by fate, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. It was a message from Rachel. "I know you're upset, Jason. I need to explain. Please meet me at the apartment. I'm not with Brad. I never was. I owe you the truth." My heart skipped a beat. Could it be true? Was she trying to make amends? Or was this another lie, another part of the web she had spun? I didn't know what to think. But I knew one thing for sure. I had to hear her out. I had to know everything. I drove back to the apartment, my hands gripping the wheel tightly, the weight of the world pressing down on my chest. When I arrived, Rachel was standing outside, waiting for me. Her eyes were red, and there was a look of genuine sorrow on her face. "Jason," she said softly, "I never meant for any of this to happen. I need you to listen, please." I didn't say anything. I just nodded and followed her inside. The apartment felt cold, empty in a way that it hadn't before. The walls seemed to close in as we sat down across from each other. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be," she began. "But there's something you need to understand. Brad, he's not the only one. There's more to the story. And I need to tell you the truth." I felt my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in shallow bursts. What was she about to say? Was this it? Was this the moment where everything made sense? "I wasn't just with Brad, Jason," Rachel continued, her voice trembling. "Victor, he was the one who started all of this. He's the one who manipulated me." I froze. My mind raced, trying to process what she was saying. Victor had manipulated her? But why? What was his endgame? "Victor," I said, my voice hoarse. "What do you mean?" Rachel wiped her eyes, her voice breaking. "Victor has been using me. He knew I wanted a promotion, and he used that against me. He told me that I would get the promotion if I slept with him. But it didn't stop there. Brad got involved, and then it spiraled. And I thought I could control it, but I couldn't." I stared at her, trying to process this new reality. The man I had trusted, the man I had worked with for years, he had orchestrated all of this? It felt like a cruel joke, but Rachel's tears and broken demeanor told me it was real. "And what about the photos?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "The ones with Brad and Victor?" Rachel looked down, ashamed. I didn't want to believe it either, but Victor knew how to play me. He knew what buttons to push, and I let him. But the photos, they weren't what you think. Brad and I, it was never about love. It was about control, about power, and I got caught up in it. I sat back, my mind spinning. This wasn't the Rachel I had known. She wasn't the woman I had married. This was someone broken, someone lost in a world of manipulation and deceit. But there was something in her voice now that was different, regret, genuine. Regret. I'm sorry, Jason. I'm so sorry. I've ruined everything, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. I looked at her, my chest tightening. I had been angry, furious even. But now all I felt was exhaustion. I didn't know if I could forgive her. I didn't know if I wanted to. But I knew one thing. I couldn't live in this lie anymore. I don't know what to do with this, Rachel, I said, my voice low. I don't know if I can stay, but I need time. I need to figure this out. She nodded, wiping away the tears. I understand. I'll give you all the time you need. I stood up, my heart heavy. I didn't know where this would go. I didn't know if our marriage could survive this. But I knew one thing for sure. Rachel had given me the truth, and now it was up to me to decide what to do with it. As I walked out of the apartment, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The path ahead was uncertain, and there was no easy solution. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was in control of my own future.